Hi everyone, Courtney here with Bionic Blaze Clothing, two-time cancer survivor and amputee. I just got back from vacation and was just thinking about accessibility struggles that we experienced throughout the whole thing. My partner and I did a lot of walking. I had my mobility scooter. That was super helpful. It's the size of a suitcase when you fold it down, so that was really great to be able to have that and just be able to bring it onto the plane, and it was TSA approved, so that was really great too. It definitely struggled on hills. We were in Seattle for about 4 days and my partner had to push me up the hill at one point because it was so steep. It was a really, really steep hill. Transportation was actually really amazing in Portland. It was super easy. It was a little bit hard to turn into the buses, but with a little bit of help and getting up, it was totally accessible. All the bus drivers everywhere were super helpful and super friendly, which was like a pleasant surprise for sure. The trams and the trains in Portland were also really awesome. There was a ton of different choices and it was just a really, really great experience to be able to do that if we were wanting to go somewhere that was super far from where we were at. We did walk a lot. My partner probably did 25,000 steps a day at least. So it was definitely a lot of exploring the whole entire different areas and things like that, but it was great to be able to take the train or the tram over to the area we wanted to go, explore the area, and then come back either walking or taking the train or the tram back. It made it really great, and it was also super affordable. In Portland, there is a disabled discount, probably about half the price. I believe Seattle had something too, but I didn't bother to figure out the way that they had their stuff was a little bit more confusing. Seattle was definitely very, very, very hilly, and so even getting out of the buses on some of those steep inclines was a little sketchy, and traveling around was a lot more work. The curb cutouts pretty much for both places wasn't too terrible, but when you got into smaller neighborhoods, there was a curb cutout on one side but not on the other. And when I'm saying curb cutout, I mean that ramp that goes on the sidewalk. That's called a curb cutout. So there was a chunk of places that didn't have it, and so I had to get out of the scooter, step down, and have my partner help me bring the scooter down. But and some of the lips weren't that big where I could just kind of take them slowly, but some of them were pretty big to where you wouldn't want to do that. So that was definitely a challenge at times when we were trying to figure it out. There would be times where I would actually go down the block and then go down a driveway and then go across to another driveway to get onto the other side of the sidewalk. So that was definitely something interesting to kind of think about when traveling and walking around a lot. Some of the other bigger issues that I kind of found myself dealing with is like tight spaces and not very wide spaces for areas. You know, not every doorway is going to be accessible. So we tried to be accommodating as much as we could, and we would fold up the scooter as, you know, here and there, and just tried to make sure that we weren't in the way. And that was another struggle, and like mental struggle for me, is like constantly thinking if I'm in the way and if I'm taking up too much of the aisle or things like that, which is kind of a crappy thing to have to think about. Like, you're in the way because there hasn't been the space that's created for you, and that's a huge part of accessibility and a huge struggle for anyone with any sort of disability, but especially people that are in mobility devices, and even using crutches, you need a little bit wider of a berth sometimes. So it's definitely one of those things where you're not necessarily thinking about it. And we went to a lot of places that said that they were accessible, but the second that you have a lip, you know, that's about this big, you're no longer an accessible place for some people. So that in itself makes you not accessible. There were places that had like a whole step to get into the restaurant or things like that. It was obviously not accessible, and I tried to make a point to go into the accessibility section and kind of make a note on those kind of things just for future people, and my partner was doing the same. We went to this place that you can go to the high rise and have a drink on the rooftop, and we get there, and right when I enter the door, there's like a flight of stairs to even get up to talk to anyone. By a flight, I mean like 5 or 6 stairs, which still is not, accessible. And it said it was accessible, and then the person told us that the elevator was out and you had to climb 3 flights of stairs. So at that point, we're like, that's not accessible at all. So it was just very frustrating at times. There were so many people that were so incredibly kind and wanted to be helpful, and it was definitely one of those things of like, I wanted to be able to relax and be self-aware, like not be so self-aware, but I felt like everywhere we went was so public that I needed to make sure I was out of the way. I don't know if anyone else that uses mobility devices feels that way. I definitely felt that way, which was kind of crappy. Not to say I still had an amazing time. It was still an enjoyable trip. I was just kind of thinking about that piece of it on my drive to work and my drive home. Just kind of reflecting on some of the things that I wish were a little bit different, but there's not really any of my control over it. That being said, I'm super grateful to have someone that can help me lift my scooter, and I can do it myself as well. It's pretty heavy and awkward, so trying to do that with a prosthetic is hard. Our first place in Portland had steps to get inside, and so that would have been really hard for me to carry the scooter inside and outside, so I'm super grateful to have someone that's helping me with that. And there was also a ton of places that were like a pleasant surprise. Like they tried to make sure that there was aisle space. We went to this really great thrift store in Seattle, and all the aisle spaces were super wide. They were really conscious of being accessible to everyone. July is Disability Pride Month, so they already had that in mind. And that day that we went happened to be immune deficient awareness, and so they asked you to put on masks when you came inside. It was just really nice to be able to see that. They did have a whole downstairs that it was impossible to get to if you're in a wheelchair, but the vast majority of the area was really well spaced out, and so that was super helpful. All of the local buses and trains were accessible, were super helpful, and tried to be as useful as possible. We did a train ride from Portland to Seattle, and that was super, like, a really great experience. We ended up having to spend more money than we wanted to initially because our first train got canceled. But then we got this huge room. It was a disabled room, and so it had the space to be able to just leave my scooter intact, and they had a whole ramp that all I had to do was roll up it, and it worked great. And we got free dinner with our ticket and free drinks, so that was super, like, a pleasant surprise. So it was definitely one of those things where you're not necessarily knowing what to expect, but it was definitely really, really nice to be able to experience that. I did have a little bit of a struggle on the way home. On the way there, the stewardesses were really helpful. But on the way home, we did have a bit of issue. So anyone that uses mobility aids, for you to know for traveling on the airport, is that you have the right to have any of your mobility aids if they can fit inside of the closets or the overhead spaces. You have priority over everybody, and that includes the stewardesses. So if the stewardesses have their bags in the closets, they have to move their stuff for you. If I had one half of my scooter, it's really hard to pick up and put overhead because it's heavy, and so there was a stewardess that had a bag there, and they kind of hesitated on letting me put the mobility device into the closet, but then they accommodated after a little bit of talking, so that's a little frustrating. And then the second half of the scooter we brought and put it in the overhead bin, and some people weren't being very conscious of it, and I even stated that it was fragile and I did not want anything put on top of it, which they complied, but it felt very awkward, and like no one was advocating for me. I had to advocate for myself. You have the right to advocate for yourself, and you are able to go through TSA fairly smoothly. I almost always have to get tested. They test if you have a prosthetic, they test your prosthetic, they test your mobility devices. A lot of times it's pretty smooth. I have found out that if you do the scanner where you hold your hands over your head, that they will always pat you down. So I'm to the point of like, why am I even doing this? Because my prosthetic will always make the alarms go off. So it's not totally worth it to try and go through that whole scanning thing. You're never going to get through. They're going to pat you down. So it's almost better to just be like, hey, just put me through the wheelchair accessible area and we'll do the testing and then I can be done. And that's another kind of funny thing and that I always think about is that they're testing all these disabled people and making us have to spend more time waiting for a female attendant and things like that, to the point where it feels a little silly. It's like, yes, I can imagine that those would be easier places to hide things or whatever, but I mean, come on. It feels like profiling. So yeah, there's definitely some obstacles and challenges and frustrations, and it's definitely never fun to go to a place that says it's accepting of all, and then the only way to get in is 5 steps and nowhere to really like enter in other ways. So it's just a little frustrating, and I think that as disabled people, we kind of have to think about that in a way is that I don't think that we get considered a lot of the time. So it's a little hard just moving about the world, and I know that a lot of people have those issues. But I will say that there are other awesome things that you can take advantage of. There are special disabled rooms at the airport specifically. They were super nice, because a lot of times when I take my scooter into the regular bathroom, one, the disabled stall is taken by someone that's not disabled, and they always take forever because they're changing the clothes or whatever might be happening. And my scooter usually doesn't fit in those. So I took advantage of the companion disabled bathroom, and it was like super posh and super nice, and obviously it didn't take forever in there because I also feel like, oh, I shouldn't be in here, even though I probably am totally allowed to take advantage of that kind of stuff. Other things is like disabled parking. In California, for sure, you can park in metered for free. You can park in everywhere except for yellow, red, and white with no issue. You don't have to pay for anything. You can park in timed zones for as long as you want. So especially in the city, a lot of times we'll really take advantage of that and use the disabled sign if we have our car. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. In a ton of public spaces, they'll have stuff at discounted prices for disabled people and veterans and elderly. So that's definitely something to ask about. There are other places that I felt like should have had some sort of discount because you didn't have access to all, like everything that was provided. So you weren't getting the full experience, but I feel like that's something that I'm going to just give feedback to those places too specifically. But there's a ton of other little things where like I feel weird about it. I know some of my disabled friends feel weird about it. It's our right to take advantage of it because it is harder for us to move about the world, and the things that we can get are to our benefit, awesome. I had a really great time. It was way hotter than I was thinking it was going to be. It was a heat wave, so that was unpleasant, and I came home to 105-degree weather, but I am home. I'm actually happy to be home. It was a really great trip, but it was definitely a lot. A lot of traveling around and exploring and stuff, so it's nice to be just kind of chill on the couch for a little bit. I hope you all have a great week, and thanks for listening to me talk.